is the New South Wales Country Hour with Michael Condon on ABC Radio New South Wales.
Hello again, welcome to the show this Monday afternoon. Coming up, more details on the lockdown encroaching on regional areas now, regional towns. First Armidale, now Tamworth. And an Aussie scientist seems to have cracked the code, and now he's being recognised for United Nations work on developing healthy sugar.
I'll give some examples like rice. So there's now an encouragement to have brown rice instead of white rice, and wheat, whole wheat, instead of refined wheat or refined white flour. And so this is no different. The sugar context is that instead of white refined sugar, it's just an unrefined brown sugar.
In the battle against diabetes, and you can always send a comment on any of our stories on the program, 0467 922 684. That's the number to text me here at the Country Hour. But first up today, let's look at the season. Average to above average winter rainfall has supported a strong seasonal outlook for most of New South Wales. The rainfall has, though, raised concerns of waterlogging in some districts, particularly the central and tableland areas of the state. While rain has improved the conditions across much of New South Wales, slow, variable and delayed patterns of drought recovery continue in parts of western New South Wales and western areas of the Riverina and also the Murray regions. The good news is that the official New South Wales drought indicator shows 96% of New South Wales is no longer in drought. Scott Wallace, Seasonal Conditions Coordinator with New South Wales DPI, says things are continuing to improve.
Yeah, that's right, Michael. It's been a relatively solid year again across much of New South Wales. And as you say, the southwest continues to lack that sort of residual moisture that we'd be looking for that longer-term confidence of drought recovery, as are parts of Western region. And that's always an area that the New South Wales DPI keeps an eye on. But it certainly is a good follow-up to what was a good season for a lot of people last year. And we continue to wait and hopefully build up some residual in those areas that have missed out in the last 18 months.
So 96% of the state out of drought, just that small corner, although some are too wet. Yeah,
it's a mixed bag again. I think, as I was sort of saying, the last 18 months for a lot of people has been quite good rainfall and we have built that residual up. So in a lot of those areas, that residual has meant that we are seeing a lot more water coming out of hills and things like that, and the waterlogging situation, particularly on flat country in a lot of the state and some of the grains areas, has provided some issues this year.
And does that mean that we might see a reduction in some yield somewhere as a result of too much waterlogging, say Parks, Forbes, around that area?
It's quite possible. Obviously, it's been adverse for crop growth. Couple that with probably a bit of a greyer winter and less solar radiation as well. So the crops are probably a bit behind as we would like to see them from an optimal perspective. And it probably has made things like getting fertiliser and some of our crop chemical and crop care products onto the ground as quickly as we would like as well.
So the aerial spraying business is doing well at the moment?
Quite possibly, yes. I think obviously with the wet conditions too, we're probably seeing more prevalence in disease and certainly higher risk.
And what about in the north of the state, New England, northwest, because they were sort of lagging behind, but they've caught up now?
Catching up, yep, same story. Slowly seeing more of that consistent rainfall in the 6 months after, even with the sort of dry April and May period. So we are catching up there. The coast, interestingly enough, was lacking a little bit of rainfall in terms of the monthly averages in the last 2 months. So maybe a little bit of drying out there and hopefully helping some of the recovery work in the north. But even the south coast was dry last month. So a bit of a mixed bag.
So the north coast and mid-north coast, hopefully allowing those floods to move away and recover.
Yeah, it's a pretty big process for those guys and still managing that. It's a sort of a long-term deal with the significance of the flooding that happened there early in the year. So hopefully from a pastures perspective that, they're getting a good chance to get things back in and back up to a stage that helps them be more productive for the longer term.
Now, the forecast, the sort of short-term forecast is for a bit of a rest in rainfall. Many people will be happy about that. But how much of a rest would people need? What would sort of be ideal? A week of no rain?
Certainly where conditions on the ground are waterlogged or very wet, that would be ideal. We're coming into that time of the year and in the lead up to spring where there's possibly other growers where the rainfall and the waterlogging situation isn't as bad. And we're coming to that time of the year where maturity of crops means that a good rain by the end of August and into September would be ideal for them. So it's a bit of a mixed bag from, as it always is, I suppose, but it's a bit of a mixed bag from who needs what, but certainly some drying closer to the tablelands and on that flat country, as you've identified in the cropping and grains districts, would be ideal for the next couple of weeks.
And also take the pressure off the flooding and flooding into the dams, and then the dams overspilling too. So we want to we don't want to see that.
Ideally not, no, that's for sure. I mean, obviously, as the saying goes, there's possibly more money in mud than dust, but given the residual situation of the soil moisture this year, there is possibly more risk for those issues happening.
So a bit of a break from the rain for a while, but spring rain sort of at the end of the month. That would be sort of ideal.
As always, that spring rainfall tends to be a good marker for a good summer. So it'll be interesting to see how it does dry out, if it does dry out in the next couple of weeks. And, our focus then turns to how much productivity we can get out of our spring, and then we'll see where we're at in summer.
And a bit more water in the Darling, which is a positive thing.
Yes, it is. And I think that comes down to that residual soil water influence we've been seeing and that higher consistency of rainfall in many parts of the catchment over the last 18 months. And I think certainly the major reservoir storages are much greater, particularly in the north, at around 70% at the moment, I understand, than they were last year. So things are moving in the right direction, and it's a really good story to have a bit more flow coming down the Darling, absolutely.
Scott Wallace is a seasonal conditions coordinator for New South Wales DPI. Well, if we're set for a good harvest, will we have enough workers? With another huge grain harvest looming, many rural businesses are already on the search for staff, and with limited seasonal workers in Australia due to ongoing COVID-19 border restrictions, employers are being urged to look at ways they can make their workplace more appealing. Occupational therapist Esther Petrie is a consultant with AgriFocused in the Riverina, and she explains more about how to recruit and retain workers.
Good, clear communication is key. When you're drawing from a pool of potentially less experienced workers, which is what a lot of people are saying at the moment, that it is just so hard to get anyone at all, that you're potentially drawing from a pool of less experienced workers. And the key to retaining those people is good, clear communication from the very beginning. Good, clear communication about what your expectations are, and good, clear communication about what exactly the role is, what exactly they need to do, and how you'd like them to go about that. My background is in health, and we know in my field that when you're talking about building new skills and helping people to build new skills, that errorless learning is the best learning. So the more that you can provide good, clear communication, good, clear training, good, clear demonstration of what you want people to do and how you want them to go about it, build on their strengths and skills, is the best way that you're going to, I guess, develop your own quality workforce from the beginning. Of course, mistakes do happen, and I think another thing that makes a big difference in whether someone's going to stick around or come back next season as well is how you deal with those mistakes when they arise. We've all seen those funny little clips on Facebook of someone going just off tap down the two-way at someone about an error, and we have a bit of a laugh, and that's okay. But I'm not sure how well that actually flies if you're hoping people are going to come back again, especially if they're not your immediate family. So I think building on skills that people have, communicating things really clearly from the outset, what's obvious to you may not be obvious to someone else. You may be getting someone who has little experience. You may be getting someone who's got a different way of doing things from where they've been previously. So if you state the obvious, communicate really clearly from the beginning, build on the skills that people have, and just be careful how you do approach mistakes or miscommunications, then I think you're on the road to creating that kind of environment that people want to come back to again or want to stick around.
So are there ways that you're hearing that people are trying to attract and retain staff by making things more appealing at that workplace or at their particular farm?
Yes, there certainly is, Cara. We put out a little Facebook survey through our AgriFocus page last harvest just because attracting staff even then was quite topical, and we put out a little survey about what sorts of extras people were throwing in or what sorts of things they were doing to help attract staff, and it was quite interesting to get the results of those back, because what we found was that about 20% of respondents were doing the laundry for their chaser bin drivers and their header drivers, and some even for their truck drivers. So there's all sorts of things that people are doing to help attract and retain that workforce. I mean, far be it from me to add something else to the to-do list for those busy times of years and say you need to be doing the laundry as well. But I think what it says or what it shows is that it's so competitive, and just the little things that you think that you can do to make those conditions more appealing, to make it a more pleasant place to be, they do make a difference, and people are out there adding them into the package, I suppose. And
was there much mention that people were offering competitive pay? A farmer I've spoken to more recently is looking for staff already for harvest, and he said that they're offering competitive money to get people there and accommodation and meals. So was that also any part of any of the findings you came across?
Yeah, definitely. And again, we found that it varied quite a lot, but overall it's competitive. And interestingly, we know when we were looking at meals and accommodation and laundry that those things weren't, people were asked to skip that question if the pay was reduced to reflect those. So all those 20% of people who were doing the laundry for their workforce, that was on top of a pretty competitive rate of pay.
A pretty competitive rate of pay, but that may not do it. That's AgriFocus consultant and occupational therapist Esther Petrie from West Wyalong speaking there to Cara Jeffrey. 12:17.
You're listening to The Country Hour
on ABC Radio New South Wales.
Well, rural financial advocate Bill Thompson is being remembered as a trailblazer for the work he did on drought policy and succession planning. The 63-year-old lawyer from Coolamon in the Riverina died last week. He was, of course, on the Country Hour on numerous occasions. He had been living with Parkinson's disease. Paul Sullivan from the Rural Financial and Counselling Service in New South Wales Southern Region says rural communities owe Mr Thompson a lot.
Bill was a great person. He was a very good espouser of the benefits of the service in public. He spoke well. He was well respected, and he was able at a time when the service started to break through community hesitancy of what the counselling service did, because he, like all of us who were back in the earlier days, we all saw the necessity for the social benefits of having a service like that. It was not just for farmers, because it was a community service. That's what he was good at. He would go anywhere and he'd speak to them, and he could command the room.
You're talking about a time when the service first started. Just paint a picture about why exactly it was so important, that origin, and what actually it did at that point.
Well, back then, Isadora, it was the time of around about the high interest rates, and farmers were going to the wall. They couldn't pay their bills, and Fran Rowe up in Tottenham sort of banged on the doors of a few politicians about saying we need to help these farmers. And Bill got on board, and he was able to, as I say, spread the word and explain the benefits of keeping the community structure behind, because farmers were having to leave. They were going broke, or they were being sold up. The banks weren't particularly pleasant to them in those days. And you needed advocates like that to stand up to them and show how important it was to keep the structure of the small society groups, these little towns, little villages where, as you know, you lose one family, you lose a few more kids out of the school, that sort of thing. Very, very important. He saw it and he was a strong advocate for it.
So I understand he lobbied for changes to government drought policy. How important was that?
Very. It aligned with the same thing. It was after, of course, the financial thing, because there was no strict drought policy back then. We've all been farmers. If you go bung and you have no income, you're in a bit of a rough old time. But with a drought, if you can transition between drought and the wet season, like you're getting over in the Riverina now, everyone knows that comes back again. But it's just helping out through that dip, those 2 or 3 years when it's really tough. There's no income, household support, family support, maybe a bit of interest support. That keeps the whole rural group together, and very, very importantly so.
What legacy do you think Bill has left for farming communities?
Undoubtedly in the Riverina, and hopefully in the wider state, maybe even in Australia, because he did used to go to national conferences when he could. The fact that he was such a good, clear advocate, he was never flowery, he was never flashy, he was never dramatic, but he was firm and he was very clear, and he was very easy to listen to, and he could get his story across and get the situation across very clearly to a huge cross-section of society. So that will be his legacy. He did a tremendous thing for the rural sector, and certainly in our region, that can't be dismissed. He really is one of the founders who helped create what we've got now.
And I understand he also worked extensively in succession planning, a trailblazer, in fact. How important was that work?
Well, again, as you would know, as farmers age, they don't really want to know what to do, and you've got competing interests and things like that. And he brought it to the fore. And Cummins Hendricks, his firm, were really good at this stuff. And he didn't always charge for it, but he would go to forums and farmer field days and talk about, you have to think about your future. You can't hand over the farm to your 50-year-old son because he's lost interest by then. You have to prepare for transitional change. And of course, these things are generational changes. So he made it part of the conversation, and now it is a very strong part of most farm business conversations.
Paul Sullivan from the Rural Financial Counselling Service speaking there to Isadora Bogle, and you can read more about Bill Thompson, who died last week, by going to abc.net.au/rural. It's 22 minutes past 12.
You're listening to The Country Hour
on ABC Radio New South Wales.
Well, are you a bit of a sweet tooth, but you worry about the health implications associated with eating too much sugar? Well, an Aussie scientist seems to have cracked the code and has now been recognised by the United Nations for his work developing a healthy sugar. Keely Johnson has more.
After losing his brother to type 2 diabetes in 2016, Aussie scientist Dr. David Kinnar was determined to tackle the sugar crisis and improve world health by developing a healthy sugar.
The sugar crisis was being addressed by lots of different artificial sweeteners and, sugar becoming poison, whereas actually sugar can be the solution to the sugar problem.
Dr. Kinnar founded food tech business Nutrition Innovation to develop a low GI raw brown sugar.
All the carbohydrate sources you take, I'll give some examples like rice. So there's now an encouragement to have brown rice instead of white rice, and wheat, whole wheat, instead of refined wheat or refined white flour. And so this is no different. The sugar context is that instead of white refined sugar, it's just an unrefined brown sugar. The problem with that hypothesis is then that you've got to make sure that the brown sugars are consistent. And the technology in the sugar industry doesn't allow them to make a consistent brown sugar that will give you the health benefits. And so we developed the technology to make a consistent brown sugar, but an industrial brown sugar.
Nutrition Innovation have been recognised at the United Nations Food Systems Summit, named one of 50 best small and medium-sized enterprises from around the world, transforming food systems for a better tomorrow.
I'm still kind of getting over the shock of getting it, to be frank. The award is a great honour by the United Nations. It's about more food sustainability. It's about meeting goals to get affordable, good, nutritious food into everyone's hands. And so our business, in fact, actually empowers it. So we've got interest in sharing the technology with local producers to decrease costs so that they can actually get an affordable product out to the market where it's needed. So the technology is retrofitted into the existing sugar mill. This is just using the existing infrastructure And part of the United Nations Award is about that. It's just using the existing infrastructure more efficiently, but getting it into the local sugar producers so that they can take advantage of this and do a good job. Like, for example, Sunshine Sugar in northern New South Wales. So the technology is embedded there for use here in Australia.
Sunshine Sugar CEO Chris Connors says his company was first in the world to start using Nutrition Innovations technology to create their own low-GI sugar.
We've been working on producing low-GI sugar, and we have produced it for the last 3 years. It's a part of our strategic business plan to change the future of our business, looking at the sustainability of everything.
As a diabetic himself, Mr. Connors has seen the benefits of his product.
People that are diabetics, and I'm one of them, you can actually use this sugar and it won't impact because it takes that much longer to actually process, and so it's a healthier type of sugar.
And have you noticed it's quite popular among customers?
It's taking a bit of time. There's certainly a lot of inquiry about it. We're seeing now in Australia people like Aldi are actually picking it up, putting it on the shelves. So I'm expecting that'll continue to develop. I never thought that we'd have it on the shelves and out there straight away and have big tonnages, but we're seeing it quite a good take-up now.
So what's so good about low GI? Put simply, GI refers to the glycemic index for a food and measures how carbohydrates affect blood glucose levels. It then ranks the quality of carbohydrates based on this score. High GI foods tend to cause blood sugar levels to spike and then crash, whereas low GI foods are digested and absorbed more slowly. According to Susan McLeod, a nutritionist at La Trobe University, this slow release of glucose into the bloodstream is proven to be much more beneficial for the body.
For example, if we eat white sugar, that's given a glycemic index of 100. But if we had low GI sugar, for example, that might have a glycemic index of 50, which means that our body metabolizes it slower, so it allows us to control the release of glucose into our system, which for someone with diabetes, for example, that's really beneficial because their body doesn't respond to glucose in the system the same as someone without type 2 diabetes would. Their goal would be to have a low GI diet so that they can actually control how glucose is metabolised or released into their bloodstream.
But diabetics are not the only group of people who benefit from low GI sugar. It can actually help burn fat.
Once we don't have glucose to metabolise, our body will turn to our fat stores. If you then consume sugar, it puts a hold on burning the fat and it starts to burn the glucose because glucose is the body's preferred energy source. When we have white sugar, it's made up of two molecules. So one is glucose and one is fructose. When we eat that, it separates those two. So rather than being joined together, it separates them and then we metabolise the glucose and we metabolise the fructose. What Nucane have done is their technology changes how they process their sugar, and it's got an antioxidant in it which actually minimises the amount of breakdowns. So if we prevent that breakdown of the glucose and the fructose together, or we minimise that, it means that there is less glucose available to burn. So that's how it has a relationship with obesity. Because if we're burning fat, obviously, that's a great thing, right?
Nutritionist at La Trobe University, Susan McLeod, ending that report by Keely Johnson. It's 12:28.
The Country Hour on ABC Radio New South Wales.
Well, we'll hear the latest details about the lockdown now coming into force in the Tamworth region. The latest on that shortly. It's also on top of the Armidale lockdown. We'll hear about that in a minute as well. But meanwhile, on the New South Wales-Queensland border, the little town of Hebel has put up a mound of dirt to stop the traffic heading across the border. Yep, you heard it, that's right. Hebel on the Queensland side, not far from Angledool in New South Wales and Lightning Ridge. The mound has cost the local council $250,000 to set up and run, and that cost is likely to force rates up for the 62 local residents. But the Queensland government isn't offering to help out. There are thousands of back roads around the state, and also the dirt mounds across the road. They're often the only way that local councils can control the traffic. Hebel resident Catherine Cargnoni is concerned about the cost and the problems it creates for farmers outside of the town.
I understand it's a local road and they are required to maintain the local road, and the directive was given for them to create the barrier. But again, if the police are already in town and monitoring both roads, I don't think I really understand why they actually have to close that road anyway.
Is it inconvenient? Is it creating frustration?
Oh, I think it's just inconvenient for, and it is frustrating for those properties that are along that road. You know, if they need deliveries, trucks can't deliver through a mound. If they're trying to transport stock, then they have to transport the stock, you know, further around. It just takes an extra 40 or 50 k's extra to go around the other road to get to their properties. So if you're paying per kilometre for transport, then that can be quite inconvenient and expensive.
The optics of a dirt mound at the border is quite strange as well, isn't it?
Well, I think there's plenty of dirt out here for them to move, so it's just easy. It's something easy for them to place. Previous attempts at other barriers were unsuccessful because the locals found it frustrating and they moved them out of the way.
Are you scared of people with COVID from New South Wales coming here?
I think people are nervous because we are on a highway, and so there is a lot of traffic, and we have an elderly population. Most of our residents are 40 and above, and so I think there is some people that are nervous. However, I think most people are doing the right thing when it comes to COVID and their travel.
So mounds of dirt on the road to stop people going from Queensland into New South Wales and vice versa. That's Catherine Cargnoni from Hebel talking there to Jonathan Daly. You're listening to The Country Hour, 29 minutes to 1. Let's get some news headlines now from Adam Story. Good afternoon.
Afternoon, Michael. Well, Tamworth is the latest city to be plunged into lockdown in the state. It comes as New South Wales recorded 283 new cases. Now, the lockdown in Tamworth, which is going to last for 7 days, was announced after a person from Newcastle who tested positive travelled to the city while infectious and visited a number of venues. Further up north, the member for Lismore, Janelle Saffin, is calling for a snap 3-day lockdown on the north coast after a man tested positive. The man in his 50s was admitted to Lismore Base Hospital yesterday, and he was believed to be visiting the Byron Bay region after travelling from Sydney. Now, the state government says the health system is managing, despite concerns about the number of staff in intensive care units. There are now 349 COVID patients in hospital. 67 of those are in intensive care and 29 on ventilation. And the pharmaceutical company Moderna is now looking at whether Australia could take part in a vaccine trial for young children. It's published its latest financial report, and it's outlined plans to have about 6,000 children aged between 6 months to 12 years take part in the study, and they've nominated Australia and places like Canada as other trial grounds. So that's obviously would have to approval for the federal government, so we'll see where that goes. No Olympics news because it's all over.
And
only for another 3 years. Then you have to wait 3 years.
That's right,
till,
exactly.
Is
Paris.
Paris next,
Paris,
yeah.
Paris, yes. It was interesting opening ceremony, interesting closing ceremony.
I didn't see the opening ceremony, I only saw a bit of the closing ceremony, but it seemed to be a big, more video presentation than...
Probably as a result of the COVID thing, I would imagine.
I assume so. I don't think that was probably what they originally had planned.
And all at the last minute, they quick, let's film it.
The athletes seem to be enjoying it on the field.
Sure they did. Yeah. And now a lot of them back in Howard Springs.
What a return.
That's right, exactly. That's right.
Look, once they're out, they'll receive the welcome that they deserve.
That's right, quite right. Yeah. Right. All right, thanks for that, Adam. Okay. Adam's story there with the news headlines and Olympic news and a whole range of other things. COVID news. Let's find out what's happening with the weather news. Gabrielle Woodhouse at the Bureau. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Michael. How are you?
Very well. So fine for a couple of days and then a bit of a change?
That's right. So at the moment there's a cold front that's sort of moving through Western Australia, and that's going to come across to New South Wales during Wednesday and Thursday. So warm, dry and sunny ahead of it, effectively. So for inland temperatures, we're looking at temperatures on Wednesday being, 5 to 8 degrees above average, particularly west of the Divide and across the south of the state. So maximum temperatures anywhere from the mid-20s up to the high 20s for what we're looking at on Wednesday. But on Wednesday, we are going to see that front that's going to come through, and that's going to bring some fairly windy conditions. So it's likely that we could end up seeing a severe weather warning for some damaging winds being issued for the Alpine Peaks. Outside of those Alpine Peaks, it is going to be quite windy, but it's a bit more questionable as to just how windy it's going to be. And as that change moves further towards the northeast of the state on Thursday, we'll see those winds starting to drop off. And we will also see a couple of showers developing mainly across the ranges and the western slopes. But rainfall totals at this point don't look to be anything too drastic, a couple of millimetres. Around the Alpine Peaks, so that's where we're expecting some of the higher totals to fall. So anywhere from, say like 15 up to about 30 millimetres at this point for the Alpine Peaks and down towards Tumut. So in terms of those catchments west of the Divide that have been quite wet, where we are still seeing a couple of minor flood warnings, this coming week we look as though there's not too much more rainfall to help swell those rivers again.
Yeah, because that is a concern, isn't it? The hydrologists no doubt would be watching that, but not too much rain, and not too much rain on the agricultural areas either in the central west, or because some of those areas are pretty boggy at the moment, I gather.
Yeah, they are quite boggy, and like I said, in terms of the rainfall that's coming through with the front on Wednesday and Thursday, it looks as though it's only going to be a couple of millimetres at best, and not sort of widespread, much higher value. So it's only a couple of millimetres for what we can see at the moment as that change moves through. But as that change gets up to the northeast on Thursday, it starts to stall and weaken, so we could see a little bit more shower activity across the northeast quarter of the state going into Friday and Saturday.
Right, and after that system goes through, what sort of weather can we expect after that?
Well, once that front moves through, we'll have a ridge that's going to push across the state, so it's going to remain fairly dry and sunny for most areas. But like I said, up in the northeast quarter of the state, so up towards Coffs Harbour, Ballina, Tenterfield, and Armidale, that's where we'll still see a number of showers persisting going into Friday and Saturday.
Friday and Saturday. So that's another change coming through. That's like a second one.
No, that's just the remnants of the front that moves through, but doesn't quite sort of push the whole way through the state, and just sort of weakens and lingers up in the northeast, and that's what's going to generate a few showers up in that area of the world at the end of the week. Right, and a little bit too hard to forecast what might happen sort of early next week. Yeah, early next week, it's a bit far out at this point to sort of have a good feel as to how things are going to pan out. But as we often see at this time of the year, there'll undoubtedly be another cold front that will come through at some point. Okay, so we'll be watching that closely. All right, thanks for that, Gabrielle. My pleasure. Gabrielle Woodhouse at the Bureau, 23 minutes to 1.
The Country Hour on ABC Radio New South Wales.
Well, we're looking to get the latest in regards to the Tamworth lockdown. Also, we're hearing news about Byron as well, with another positive case being found in the Byron region. But before we do that, over the weekend, you probably heard about a COVID scare at Boggabri, at Boggabri Coal near Gunnedah. It was sent into closure for cleaning, and the man at the centre of it was rapidly retested. Well, thankfully, that second test came back negative, and the first was deemed to be a false positive, so it can all happen pretty quickly. And to see how the mines are handling this latest outbreak and looking to the future and looking at the possibility of other outbreaks, Upper Hunter reporter Jake Lapham spoke to Scott Keenan, who's the Public Affairs Director with the New South Wales Minerals Council.
Well, our industry has implemented some really strict COVID-19 protocols to help our mining workforce, our mining families and regional communities across the Hunter to stay safe during the pandemic. And we've been recognised as one of the leading industries for the way that we responded last year. Australian mining companies have implemented national protocols early in the pandemic, which helped to protect mine workers and to keep the economy moving. And because we were able to keep continuing safe operations over the last 18 months, it's meant that we've been able to keep supporting local business in the Hunter and across New South Wales, local businesses, but also businesses that supply our mines. But look, there's no doubt that the Delta variant means that things are changing. It is disappointing that the Hunter region is now in lockdown like Sydney has been for the past 6 weeks or so. It isn't the first lockdown that we've seen in a mining region. You might recall that Orange and that central west area was in lockdown, and now, of course, the Hunter region is as well. But our mines are well prepared for this scenario, and they have been working to these very strict COVID safety protocols since the start of last year. And some of the specific measures that are in place include enhanced cleaning and sanitation of our facilities, mask wearing, of course, which is mandatory now under the new health rules for the Hunter region, work from home policies for staff that are able to do their jobs from home, social distancing in crib rooms and other essential indoor areas where mine workers may need to be, and strict restrictions on visitors and workers from Greater Sydney, as well as the mandatory check-ins that we have at all of our mine sites to make sure that we know who is coming and going. And of course, we're watching these developments very closely, assessing and strengthening any policies or procedures as the situation changes.
The Tanami mine outbreak in the Northern Territory created a lot of media last month, I think it was. Over 19 cases then spawned out across 3 states. What lessons have been learned, and how have you been speaking to authorities there to learn those lessons? The
Northern Territory case is an interesting one because it's probably one of the first that happened at a remote location. It was in the Northern Territory, which was a little bit unusual as well, and at a mine site where they had a big fly-in, fly-out workforce. Of course, we don't have that here in the Hunter region or really anywhere in New South Wales. So it's a little bit of a different situation, but it's important that when these things happen, we do learn those lessons. And so we've actually had officials from that mine briefing health and safety representatives from across the New South Wales mining industry at a recent health and safety committee meeting. And look, it was really interesting to have them to share those lessons. And I know that our New South Wales mining officials from across the state, including from mines in the Hunter Valley, appreciated the opportunity to hear what happened and to hear what they learned from that experience to ensure that we could strengthen our approach here in New South Wales should the same thing happen here.
I understand mining, rapid antigen testing isn't being used at the moment. Is it something you guys would look into? I understand Racing New South Wales are doing it at racetracks in Sydney.
So at the moment, we've got all of our protocols in place, and that includes around testing. So, for example, I know that there are some mines in New South Wales that are requiring people from outside of their area coming into their area to be tested before they leave their home location and then be tested again when they come to that area. For example, a shutdown maintenance worker, for example, that may travel from the Hunter or from Sydney to Orange or to another part of New South Wales. But look, I'm not aware specifically of any mines in the region that are using that type of testing just at the moment, but certainly looking at all options in relation to how we manage this issue going forward. Vaccination is another key tool as we move through this Delta phase, and it's certainly one of the strategies that are going to be really vital for not just mining but for the whole community to move out of these lockdown situations and into a more uninterrupted life in relation to COVID.
Talking about COVID, New South Wales Minerals Council Public Affairs Director Scott Keenan speaking there with Jake Lapham, and still on that theme of COVID, of course, we heard the news today that Tamworth has become the second northern New South Wales town to go into lockdown due to COVID-19. Of course, we heard about Armidale and Byron as well. Byron, there's a case in Byron too that was announced by New South Wales Health today. It's been confirmed that a young woman travelled to Tamworth from Newcastle last week. Joining us now from our Tamworth newsroom is Molly Gorman. Good afternoon.
Hi, Michael.
So you've been hearing this news and it was quite unexpected, this news today about Tamworth.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was unexpected. I think we sort of expected there might be some cases, but I don't know that we expected there'd be a lockdown announced, and especially given that there hasn't been any cases identified. But as the Premier said in the press conference only an hour and a bit ago, the concern is that she did travel to the region while infectious, and she visited a number of locations in town here. So there is a real concern about what or how many people could have been exposed, and I guess the next few days what sort of cases could be uncovered here.
And how long is the lockdown set to last for?
So 7 days at this point, from 5 p.m. today until the 16th of August at 12:01 a.m. So that's sort of, as you mentioned, that similar lockdown idea as what we saw in Orange in the Central West a few weeks ago.
Right, okay. And what effect will it have on the businesses and moving to and through the town and that sort of thing, which, of course, Tamworth quite often is a bustling CBD?
Yeah, I mean, look, I can't speak from personal experience here. I don't live in Tamworth normally. I'm just giving the team a hand here with some coverage. But I'm from Orange, and, we did that whole week-long lockdown there, and we saw empty streets. We saw businesses doing the right thing, but saying that, it hurt, but it was also the latest blow in a long list of blows over the last 12, 18 months. So I don't know if this is going too far on behalf of your listeners, but I think regional people are so keen to keep this thing out. We're so keen to get on top of it and make sure that there isn't any cases here. That it is, unfortunately, it's a painful blow to take, but it's better to have a short lockdown and not have the cases running rampant through the community than go the other way, I think.
And this young woman was around for a day or so, visited a number of sites, so people are being made aware of those sites and told that they could be close contacts, so they need to get tested and isolated immediately for about 14 days if they've been in certain areas.
Yeah, so there's 2 close contact locations, which are the Inland Cafe and Tudor Hotel, both within the CBD on Peel Street, on Thursday the 5th of August, earlier that morning. If you've been to those 2 locations in the times which are listed on the New South Wales Health website, you need to isolate for 14 days, get tested and stay there regardless of the result. There's also 3 casual contact locations, which are Gloria Jean's Coffee, the Super Vape Store and the Ampol Roadhouse on Gunnagadoo Road. They're casual contact locations, so you need to isolate immediately and get tested and wait until you get the results of those tests. I have to say, I ducked down to one of the testing clinics this morning just to get some shots, and it was really remarkable to see the turnout. There was some delays, but I believe that they're pumping through them quite quickly now. So, hats off to Tamworth doing the right thing, turning out, getting tested at this, even, the mildest of symptoms. It's what you need to do.
Absolutely. And, of course, there won't be many horses at the Australian Equine Livestock Exhibition Centre because it's going to be a new testing clinic at the moment.
There you go. You're more across the news than I am.
So,
I didn't know that, but we did see in Blaney, the new indoor arena down there made a great testing site. So
that's right.
All about it.
And of course the call going out for people to go out and get tested. And concerning the number of venues there, including the Roadhouse, and that potentially you're talking about truckies there as well. So hopefully, COVID won't be spread.
Hopefully not, but I mean, like the Roadhouse, for example, it's a 5-minute window between 12:25 and 12:30 that they're worried about. So it's a very
limited time.
Yeah, it's a really brief moment. And I will just compare to the situation we had in Orange, where we were really concerned. I know even as a local, I was really worried because it was a very busy supermarket on a Friday afternoon that was one of the exposure sites. And we didn't end up seeing any cases out of that because people had done the right thing and, checked in, masked up, stayed home. So hopefully that's sort of the case here as well. But if you did visit one of those locations, please get out and get tested.
Okay, and then of course follow the stay-at-home orders and also the situation with Armidale and Byron as well at the moment. Molly, thanks for that.
You're welcome.
Molly Gorman there in Tamworth. It's coming up to 12 minutes to 1 here on the New South Wales Country Hour. Well, charter fishing businesses are going through a particularly hard time right now, not only because of the COVID restrictions, but it's also impacted on tourism in regional New South Wales, but also severe weather events across the mid-north coast. They've prevented many charters from getting out onto the water. Brett McKinnon from Port Macquarie Fishing Charters says it's been the most disruptive year so far that he's seen in his business.
Mid to end of January, so midsummer, the start of the bad weather. So we got a lot of nor'east weather, and then east coast low after east coast low, then through into the flood. And now that we're in winter, we're continuing to get bad weather. So the effect that has on our business is too strong of wind conditions obviously make the ocean rough, still unsafe for our customers, and makes the bar conditions unsafe. So we can't fish when we can't get to sea, and we can't fish when it's too rough for our passengers offshore. predominantly even anything above sort of 10 to 12 knots restricts us greatly because of the speed and the type of fishing that we do. So it just makes it very hard for the customers to stand, and it's all about their safety, really, at the end of the day, to try and make it as safe for them and as enjoyable as possible at the time.
So you would say now, I can't even think how many months it's been since March, but definitely since February or so this year, that's when it started to impact the business?
Yeah, February was the real start of it. So we worked a total of 4 days in February, mainly because of bar conditions and wind state. So it really knocked us for 6. So town was bustling, lots of people around, and just no chance of getting them on the water to make that income.
And when do you think weather will start clearing up for you and you'll start seeing the business kind of return to a steady pace that you'd like to see it?
Well, predominantly now, your winter months are usually nice and settled. You get westerly breeze of a morning. Going into spring, it will be nice right up to the start of summer. So hopefully the weather gods come through soon and give us some good weather.
The New South Wales government ranked charter fishing, along with recreational fishing, second in their estimated primary industries output list for 2018 to 2019. Collectively, the industry generated more than $2.3 billion in New South Wales, beating horticulture, cotton, wool and milk. Mr McKinnon found this quite surprising.
It does shock me a bit to think that you come so far ahead of agriculture, but I guess 2018, 2019 was probably the heart of the drought that we had, which was a horrible drought. So cattle sales were down, all agriculture was down, So I guess that's where the tourism industry stepped in, and you got a lot more people travelling around, where recreational fishing and charter fishing was allowed to step up a little bit and wasn't held back. So there's definitely a lot of revenue there available in the recreational sector. Everyone you talk to these days is buying a boat or going on a fishing charter. So if you get the correct weather conditions and bar conditions, there's no reason you couldn't work every day. So it's not very often we don't have someone interested or someone booked in to go on a charter. In the lull of winter, you might only have 3 or 4 days for the week, but there's still plenty of opportunity there. Yeah. Christmas holidays, for example, was every single day we were turning people down. There were so many people wanting to come. And last Christmas was an exceptional year because COVID restrictions had eased a little bit. So a lot of people wanted to get out and enjoy that Christmas time with their families. So
yeah, and that's another thing that would have kind of affected your industry, COVID. So there was kind of a burst where COVID opened up and people were allowed to come to Port Macquarie, and that was really good, but now we're kind of seeing things change again. How has that affected you at the moment?
Yeah, so this last lot of restrictions that's come in place has really knocked us around. It hit right at the start of the school holiday period. I think we had 9 cancellations straight off the bat the second the restrictions come in, and some of those were full charters. So we've got return clientele that book the entire boat for themselves for just a family of 4 or 5. They like to come on board and do an exclusive charter where it's just their family. So the boats, they can do whatever they like on the boat for the day and enjoy their own family time. So we lost those people straight away because they were Sydney-based personnel. And I think in general town is quiet this time. Like a lot of the motels aren't full at the moment because of the restrictions. So it has knocked us around.
Port Macquarie Fishing Charters, Brett McKinnon. You're listening to the Country Hour, 8 to 1. And we've just got a text in saying that the public health to remind everyone the public health order is for the Tamworth LGA, not just the Tamworth City. Brian says the reporting has been a bit confusing. So it's the Tamworth LGA, which runs from Nundle to Barabra. He's saying that that LGA is the whole area affected by the public health order. So bear that in mind. It's 7 to 1. Let's go to markets. Bendigo Sheep and Lambs. Jenny Kelly.
Good afternoon. Cheaper prices across a mostly plain yarding summed up Bendigo today. A lot of lambs were $10 to $20 cheaper, while off types that looked rough in the skin and were suspect for fat cover lost $30 and more compared to last week's very dear sale here. There was a component of quality in the cheaper trend with a lot of rough lambs on offer as tail end drafts are cleaned out, but demand was also weaker with not all the regular buyers competing as hard. Heavy export lambs $2.60 to a top of $2.92 for about 34 kilos carcass weight for a ballpark of 850 cents. A lot of heavy lambs 230 to 265, and the better quality fed trades 190 to 230. These lambs tracking in that 830 to 890 cent range, with only limited sales breaking $9 today. Where the market got erratic was on the secondary trade lambs at $160 to $185, and there was sales below 800 cents. Fed merino lambs to $239, but a lot of plainer types from $150 to $190. Light lambs also lost significant ground at $90 to $137 for most. Few pens of heavy trade suckers from $200 to $250. The sheep sale has also opened cheaper. Jenny Kelly for MLA.
Corowa Sheep and Lambs, Caroline Ronald.
Good afternoon. Agents penned 11,730 sheep and lambs, 2,000 less than last week. The yarding was made up of plainer types, with the exception of a handful of quality new season lambs offered. A smaller buying group were in attendance, operating in a softer market. Trade slipped $15 to $20, light and medium trade $156 to $215, heavy trade $193 to $238 to average 911 cents per kilo carcass weight. Heavy lambs eased $10 $217 to $253. Extra heavy export lambs fell $13 to $14, $242 to $288, with the over 30 kilo lambs $288 to $310. New season lambs to the trade were $2 to $12 softer, $188 to $235, with the heavyweights easing $8, $230 to $248. Mutton was $5 to $10 weaker. Heavy merino ewes $166 to $233. Heavy crossbred ewes reaching $229, and merino wethers sold from $194 to $234. I'm Caroline Ronald for MLA at Corowa.
W Sheep and Lambs, David Monk.
Good afternoon. Numbers were backed by 2,500 for a yarding of 25,080 lambs. It was a very good quality yarding with good numbers of heavyweight lambs along with a fair numbers of trade weights. There were also some excellent runs of merino lambs yarded. There were only a few pens of new season lambs penned. Trade lambs were up to $14 cheaper for the lighter lambs and $4 to $7 cheaper for the heavier weights. Trade lambs sold from $150 to $235 to average between $850 and 930 cents a kilogram. A few pens of trade weight new season lambs sold from $205 to $228. Heavyweight lambs were $6 to $9 cheaper, with the 24 to 30 kilogram lambs selling from $228 to $290. The over 30 kilogram lambs sold from $276 to $310 to average $8.76 cents a kilogram. Merino lambs were $10 cheaper, with the trade weight selling from $152 to $206, while the heavyweight merinos over 24 kilograms sold from $200 to $244. Lambs to the restockers sold from $100 to $167, and hoggets sold to $202. We have the balance of the lambs and 4,100 mutton still to be sold. This is David Monk reporting from Dubbo.
Wagga Cattle, Leanne Dax.
Numbers dropped by 400, with just over 1,900 yarded, of which there was a reduced offering of 156 cows. Quality was very mixed, with trade cattle in short supply. Heavy steer and bullock numbers increased, with a fair percentage snapped up by lot feeders. The pick of the veal gained 12 to 13, 505 to 564. Trade heifers sold to strong demand, lifting 14 cents, 435 to 529. Likewise, the steer portion 520 to 572. Feeder prices, believe it or not, rallied again. The lighter weights 12 cents dearer, $5 to $5.79. The medium weights out to $5.54. Feeder heifers lightweight gained 15 cents, $4.94 to $5.45. Grown steers were 9 cents better, $4.12 to $4.74. Bullocks are unchanged, topping at $4.54. Cows surged ahead, 18 cents. Heavy cows $3.90 to $4.18. I'm Leanne Dax for MLA.
Forbes Cattle, Graham Richard.
Good afternoon. Numbers were steady at 733, the quality mix with more Boss India's cattle, and most were suitable for the feeders. Light and medium trade cattle were limited. There was a good line-up of grown steers and light weaners and around 100 cows. The market sold to a dearer trend. The weaners lifted 17 cents with steers $5.20 to $5.93 and heifers reached $6.12. Light feeder steers sold to a top of 670 cents. The medium and heavy weights were 10 cents dearer, $4.60 to $5.60, a breed-related spread, and the heifers $400 to $5.20. Heavy trade cattle 420 to 451. Growing steers were 6 to 8 dearer, reaching 453, and the heifers 430 to 456. Heavy cows lifted 9, 371 to 400 cents. The medium weight 2-score cows 290 to 338. And this has been Graham Richard at Forbes.
And Tamworth Cattle, James Armitage.
Good afternoon. A reduced penning of 967 head, limited numbers of vealers, yearlings well supplied, not as many grown cattle. Quality was fair to very good, a smaller gallery of buyers. Lightweight yearling steers to restockers sold to a dearer trend, posting strong gains, 472 to 638 cents a kilo. Medium weight feeders were slightly cheaper, 430 to 566, restockers paying to 602. Heavyweight yearling steers to 500 kilos saw little but quality related change, 440 to 528. Well finished medium weight yearling heifers sold to dearer trends, quality showing some improvement. Feeders 456 to 558 cents, with trade 410 to 538 cents a kilo. Heavyweights to restock and feed 440 to 532. A line of steers over 500 kilos to feed posted strong gains. They were milk tooth and made 556 cents a kilo. Those to process also dearer, 410 to 475. Cows were slightly cheaper with less competition. Heavy 3 and 4 was 310 to 346 cents a kilo. James Armitage for MLA in Tamworth.
And on the Country Hour, it's news time.